the strange encounters in the campaign of Alexander the Great, about 330 BC, the Nephilim, and what happened according to Arian. As we know, they had historians with them, they had doctors, they had scientists, and they had journals of what they encountered and what they did as they crossed all these lands. So what did Alexander the Great encounter? During the campaign of Alexander the Great, son of King Philip and Olympias, descendant of Hercules and Achaeus by origin, those whose ancestors came from Argos, meaning Sparta, and Macedonia, and did not serve as rulers of the Macedonians by force, according to the law, but according to the law as described by Arian in Alexandru Anavasis, the Alexander the Great becoming king. We encounter strange information that historians and readers skip, either because they did not notice it or because they consider it literary fictional exaggerations. But here we'll try to look at them from another angle of technology unknown to us and secret. Well, Alexander the Great lived about 330 BC, and that was about 700 years after King David. And remember King David, of course, and David and the Goliath battle, the conflict. Goliath was one of the giants. He had there were 5 brothers who were all giants, and he had 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot, and he was considered to be a type of a Nephilim. So it's not that far-fetched to see that Alexander the Great also went his way out of Israel, way towards the east, India, and also China. And of course, he describes what he found there, being Nephilim, the abominable creatures. Now, after the death of Philip, Alexander became commander of his army in 336 BC at the age of 20. He decided to continue his father's work and plans with the expeditionary force of 37,000 men, plus about 20,000 elites. He began to conquer the world. After the Granicus River, which opened the way for Central Asia, he conquered all of the coastal Perea, and Alexander and his army descended south, conquering as many cities as they encountered. They encamped by the river Ermus, 4 kilometers from Sardis, which was their next target. It was spring then, but nevertheless, quote, suddenly bad weather occurs and it thunders wildly and water falls from the sky where the old palaces of Lydia were, and from this Alexander learned that the place where they were to build the temple was revealed by God to Zeus, and this he ordered to be done. Support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box. Now, why in the sudden change of weather did he build the temple to Zeus? As we'll see throughout Alexander's Anavasis, sudden changes in the weather were not uncommon. While some were there almost always, there were old monuments. He did not build, but each time from a temple. However, lightning pointed the place. Cracks, Hartman, junctions, etc. attract lightning more than any other area. In addition, one theory wants UFOs to be charged by lightning. Now, on the 4th day, he arrived in Ephesus. That's today's western part of Turkey's coast towards the Aegean Sea. He arrived in Ephesus and then in Miletus before the Persians. Nicanor, one of his most of his childhood friends were also his commanders, his generals. Now, Nicanor, commander of the navy, had arrived 3 days earlier and had anchored on the island of Ladi. He had gained more confidence in how they would go into naval battle with the Persians, and gave him confidence in great divine message, because in an eagle he appeared sitting on the beach facing the stern of Alexander's ships. The eagle was considered a good omen for the ancient Greeks. In fact, Alexander predicted that because he was sitting on the beach, their victory would come from the land and not from the navy, and so it did actually happen. Possibly the victory is due to some correct strategic intuition of Alexander the Great, However, it is worth remembering that the eagle is a feature of Zeus, for whom shortly before, as we saw, he built a temple. Coincidence? We can assume, however, that Nicanor was a well-known flying object, a UFO, then called the Eagle, which apparently gave them strategic information on how to proceed. Amazing. Let's see the sequel. Immediately after Miletus, he encamped at Bodrum because he learned that a large force of barbarians and mercenaries was gathering there. He did not waste time and started the siege of the city. So during a break in the siege, while Alexander was resting, quote, a swallow flew all around and on the bed, each time in another place, and cried with more noise than usual, unquote, until Alexander woke up. The soothsayer, Telmisius, said that it means obvious conspiracy against him by friends, quote, because the swallow and companion bird is human and talkative more or another bird, end quote. For all this, Alexander informed Parmenion orally and not in letters, quote, because he thought that he should not write openly about such a thing, end quote. If it was just a swallow, there was probably no reason to take such precautions, but the swallow is talkative and friendly. It is dedicated to Isis and Aphrodite. It may have been a tiny UFO called Helidoni, meaning a swallow, which apparently carries a message to its intruders. Now, going by sea from Fasilida to Pergi, this place is not passable when south winds blow. In other words, they would have a significant problem with the argument to pass. Despite this fact, he leads his own people from there, when without any previous, at least obvious reason. Notice that while blowing south, suddenly the wind changes to north. And it's clear from the description of the text that Alexander knew this information. But how did he know the winds would change as soon as he got there, in order for him to pass easily? The text does not tell us that they were waiting for the winds to change. Maybe he was informed by the friendly but talkative swallow, unless these winds change artificially and at will. And then he campaigned against cities, Silius, etc., until he reached central Pyria. He left a guard at Kelanis, and he himself marched to Gordian, a holy city and a navel of the east. At its citadel was a chariot of King Gordian, the Gordian Knot is here, as we know, in which there was an infamous link made of a skull, whose beginning and end did not seem, but that whoever untied it would conquer Asia. Alexander went to the palace, saw the bond, the Gordian Knot, and not being able to untie it otherwise, cut it with his sword. At night then, that thunder and lightning appeared from heaven. The saddle was a bright phenomenon, very often white, that is usually observed in the upper layers of the atmosphere, in the polar regions, and very rarely in the Mediterranean. We're talking about northern lights. Yeah, you don't see them in the Mediterranean because the Mediterranean is towards the equator. You don't see northern lights towards the equator. It's impossible. So, but what if by the word saddle they meant something else? The most remarkable thing, however, is that Alexander the next day sacrifices to the gods who, quote, revealed to him the signs and the solution of the bond, end quote, how he would solve the Gordian Knot. It's interesting to make a parenthesis and talk a little about the Gordian Knot. Gordian was a poor farmer. He had 2 oxen. With one, he pulled the plow. The other he was pulling it. One day, an eagle flew and sat on the yoke of the carriage. In an attempt to find out what this meant, he met a young girl who advised him to sacrifice to King Zeus. And when he did the right thing, married her, and they had a son together. That was Midas. Remember Midas and the Midas touch? Now, at the time, there were riots in the city, and an oracle said that the one who would come in a carriage would get rid of them. The Gordian entered the city with his wife and Midas. As soon as the Pyrgians saw him, they immediately made Midas their king. He freed them from the riots, and as thank you for sending the eagle, dedicated the carriage to Zeus, the carriage on the yoke of which the eagle had sat, which was the bond of the yoke. If we consider the theory that says that Zeus was driving and flying a chariot which was powered by electric charges of lightning. In combination with the previous and the next, some conclusions are inevitable. Then the Macedonian army commands Tarsus, and a little later makes the Battle of Ison in November 333 BC. He descends to Marathon and Sidon to reach outside the invincible Tyre and to besiege it in August 2032 BC. After 7 months of trying, at first Alexander wanted to make a sacrifice to the Tyrian Hercules, but because of the sacrifice they had to enter the city, the Tyrians suspected a trap and refused. So Alexander assembled a war council. The siege of Tyre, however, was not easy. The Tyrians were also great sea emperors, which means that we're talking about Tyre in Lebanon, which means that their experience was worthy of the Greek. Then their city was on an island and was fortified with very high walls. For strategic and political reasons, Tyre had to be conquered. Alexander himself easily persuaded his men about military operations against Tyre because, quote, some divine sign strengthened his conviction that that very night he appeared in his sleep, that he was attacking the wall of Tyre, and Hercules welcomed him and led him into the city, end quote. Pay close attention to this belief of Alexander. Alexander, however, did not stand in the dream. The siege began immediately. He ordered that an embankment be built from the land to the city. In other words, he had landfill from the coast to the island. He filled the land. He made a causeway of land. They erected towers and siege engines, while the Tyrians retaliated with the first fiery ship in history. But Alexander was not intimidated. He ordered the construction of larger, more powerful attack machines and ordered a raid. And almost in parallel with their own effort to overthrow the wall, quote, a triangular formation of flying shields flew over the Macedonian camp. Obviously, these are definitely UFOs. Then they marched over the city of Tyre in front of the astonished eyes of thousands of warriors. Suddenly, the largest shield emitted a ray of light, followed by others, and part of the stone walls of Tyre collapsed as if from mud. So in other words, these UFOs were throwing, laser beams at the walls of Tyre, causing the walls of Tyre to collapse so that the Macedonians could enter and take the city. And this was not done by Alexander the Great's warriors. It was done by these triangular flying UFOs. This information may be false or fictitious or misinterpreted, as it does not refer to Arian anywhere. However, a painting from 1458 in the National Library of France shows Macedonians looking at a flying chariot. But the Macedonians also managed to throw a large part of the wall in another part of it, and after towers and post towers were conquered, Alexander proceeded through the ramparts in the direction of the palace, and finally sacrificed to the Hercules for his victory and organized games and candlelight vigils. So as we can see, the, quote, triangular formation of flying shields refers to modern descriptions by UFOs. Surely we can give many interpretations, perhaps hasty. Whatever these flying shields were, they were certainly not unidentified flying objects, but known UFOs, at least Alexander. He did not call them UFOs, he called them identified flying objects. So he knew that they were flying, but he knew who they were. Alexander, despite these difficulties he knew he would face, had the certainty of victory from the dreams with Hercules. The soothsayer Aristander interpreted the dream that Tyre would be conquered with difficulties, since the deeds of Hercules were done with difficulty, but in question is different. Is it a coincidence that after the dream in which Hercules would, quote, receive him and lead him into the city, receive Alexander to the city, end quote, they actually welcomed him and led him and his army, these flying shields, these identified flying objects, unless it was a dream. But did Alexander somehow agree to this reception? Does the dream encrypt the meaning of Alexander's communication with Hercules, his distant descendant and ruler of these flying fiery shields? After Tyre, it turned to Egypt with Gaza as his first target, where he prepared for the attack on the wall. While Alexander sacrificed according to the standards, one of the carnivorous vultures flying over the altar with a stone beats his head from above, which he lifted with both his feet. A sign, as the soothsayer Aristander explained to him, that he would conquer the city, but he himself had to beware. Alexander was initially kept at a safe distance, but was later forgotten and took part in the battle where he was wounded by a catapult arrow. He immediately remembered the divination and rejoiced because that meant that he would take over the city as he did. Note that some stones also have healing properties, for example, snake bites, but the main thing is that some of the stones can make you hear the gods at the time of prayer. It's very important for this verse. The vulture conveys a hidden message to Alexander from Zeus or Hercules, which is deciphered by the soothsayer Aristander. After the fall of Gaza, after 7 days, he reached Pelusium of Egypt, and from there to Memphis, where he offered a sacrifice to the god Pitha, that is, the god Hephaestus, Vulcan. He descended the Nile, built Alexandria, and moved to the oasis of Shiva, where the oracle of Ammon Zeus, his father, was located. To get there, one had to cross the desert, which to note had no water, no trees, no hills, nothing else characteristic and distinctive. It was a vast desert where no matter how hard you walked until you reached your destination, it was like being in the same place all the time. In fact, especially when the south wind blew, it covered with sand the traces of the roads that led to the oracle. In these conditions, the army lost its way. Fortunately, however, quote, 2 dragons marched in front of the army, after which they shouted, and Alexander ordered these guides to follow, who believed that at the divine point, end quote. There's also the opinion, quote, that 2 crows who flew in front of the escort, they became Alexander's guides. Arian himself admits here that something divine helped him, end quote, but discreetly adds that, quote, the truth of fame was narrated by those who narrated about it in various inconsistently ways. Yes, Alexander had divine help. Maybe they were not dragons, maybe they were not crows again, who showed them the right way. Maybe it was flying shields, UFOs, unidentified flying objects, identified flying objects, or something else that some people deliberately removed the truth of the rumor. Shortly afterwards, the priest of the holy Ammon in Egypt greeted Alexander as the son of Ammon, that is Zeus of the Egyptians. So, amazing, yes, that obviously he had divine help from what he believed. And let's remember that Alexander the Great was prophesied about. The archangel Gabriel gave prophecies of him to the prophet Daniel in the Old Testament. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. I've translated this for you from a Greek article. Thank you.